It is my great honor to present to you the First Amendment Foundation's annual award. You are great examples of what journalism needs to do.
I guess the biggest reason why I wanted to do it was because every time I read a story here and there about this case, I just shook my head and just it never really made sense to me that someone who, molested all these girls, because, he never denied that he did this. So it wasn't a question of whether he did it. It was a question of how did he get away with it? And there was nothing that I read that answered that question for me. And when Alex Acosta got nominated by President Trump as labor secretary, I was keenly aware that he was the prosecutor who signed off on that deal. So I just wondered to myself what the victims, by this time in their late 20s, early 30s, what they thought of the fact that he and a lot of other people affiliated with this case seemed to go on with their lives. And here these women had gone through so much, and it just seemed like they were sort of forgotten. I think just putting all the pieces together presented a story, of how these girls were so like it was almost as if no one really cared about them. Everybody else was concerned about preserving their careers. They were just concerned with themselves, and nobody seemed to look at the victims. And Emily and I had done quite a few other stories involving victims in prisons, victims of extreme brutality in the prisons, and we know that there are a lot of people who just don't get a voice in our criminal justice system. And I'm just, I think we're drawn to do stories about them and to give them some kind of a voice. And I think the thing that surprised me the most was that these prosecutors just, they just sort of rolled over with Epstein on this case in a big way, almost in a way that was, and then they tried to cover their tracks, which made it worse.
So Julie had already done a lot of the background work, and she approached me once she had gotten the very first young woman to agree to go on camera. So this was kind of at the beginning, still before we really knew what we had and if we were going to get very many of these young women or not. These young women had such a different level of confidence when we got to visit them again later. And I just remember Michelle saying she had watched the video of her interview, and she just heard her 16-year-old like self talking, like even her voice, the words she was using, she just said it was so strange and, upsetting to see that she was kind of thrown back right into that time. And then talking to us later, just how she had some freeness to her and a different happiness to her.
Why would you want to dig that up? What possible reason would you want to talk to two strangers about the worst time in your life when you finally, at least, a portion of them had gone on with their lives? So I was aware that this was going to be difficult, and I tried to, in my head, I kept trying different ideas. And finally, I had done a story that same year, that year, about a Navy SEAL he was the first soldier that was killed under Trump, and his father lived in Fort Lauderdale, and I had to go, I thought I would try to go interview him, and he didn't want to talk to me at the time. And I just thought, how can I explain to him? Maybe he doesn't understand. And I wrote him a letter. And it really meant a lot to him. I told him what I wanted to do with the story. So a friend of mine knew that had worked. He did give me an interview, and someone said to me, why don't you write these women letters? So I wrote about, they were basically the same letter, but I wrote a letter to them. Like at that time I had like 60 names. And I just explained to them that I felt that this story was never told from their point of view. and they had never given a voice to what had happened to them, and now is their chance to do that. And and I told them they don't have to talk about the abuse itself. That's not the story that I'm doing. I'm doing the story about how the justice system treated you. And I didn't get a ton of response, but I got a couple, and that's all we really needed.